Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So, welcome to especially anyone who is new here. I know we probably have some new people. Would love to have everyone kind of check in via the chat and let us know if, well, first of all, let us know if you're hearing things okay and where you're from. And if this is your first time, again, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. So this is the series I do on Wednesdays where we look at usually some particular aspect of using MuseScore. And I'm forgetting that I hadn't popped out my chat so I can be seeing it. So let's do that, shall I? There we go. And now I can be seeing the chat while I look at my music. That's good. All right. So I talk about some aspect of using MuseScore every week. We have a different theme. Today's theme, loosely around the idea of Braille, because we are doing a kind of Braille study session here in the community. And for people wanting to learn more about Braille, you know, we're studying that. But I also, you know, there's things associated with it, some other, you know, other topics that could be of interest outside of just the world of Braille that we'll be bringing in here. So, yeah, let's just kind of get underway and let me show you some things. So I see James is here for the first time. Great. And thanks for your comments in the community about that Braille score we've been looking at. They're very helpful. Yeah, in the tip that I gave in this week's newsletter, I showed you how to enable the Braille panel within MuseScore. Well, let me go ahead and do that here now so I have that to work with. I'm going to go to Edit, and this requires MuseScore 4.1 or later. The current release is 4.1.1, so definitely that's what I recommend. So if I go to Edit Preferences in 4.1 or later, then in the left panel of the dialog, I will see the Braille item here at the end of the list. And then on the right-hand side is an option to show the Braille panel. Once I select that Braille item in the list on the left, then I can enable Show Braille Panel in the right. And then I can hit OK. And now I have a panel at the bottom of my display, which shows me Braille dots. And these dots are corresponding to, like right now by default, I'm not sure. I guess it's showing you whatever I happen to have selected in the score. But if I select a particular measure in the score, it shows me the content of that measure. And so I see that there's actually 2 lines of Braille here. Ooh, wait a minute. Is it actually trying to display all measures? You know, I've never, wow, look at that. Okay, so it actually looks like it tries to display all the staves all at once. So I've never actually done this on a full score like this. And Joanne, it seems like maybe you've had some sound issues often. So my guess is maybe your internet connection is just problematic, since that happens pretty often for you in situations where everyone else says that they're okay for them. So unfortunately, that's probably just how it is. So yeah, if you enable the Braille panel, it looks like it's actually giving me, how many lines of music are there? How many different instruments do I have? Trumpet, alto sax, trombone, guitar, that's 4. Piano, that's 5, 6 if I include both staves, 7, 8 for bass and drums. And if I look at the Braille that I'm displaying here, sure enough, there are 8 lines of Braille that are actually displaying. So I just learned something that if you have a full score and you select a measure, the Braille panel will actually show you all the lines, you know, all the different instruments there. So if you have a Braille display, my assumption is then cursoring up and down will then cycle through those different lines. So I don't have a physical Braille display. I still need to get together. And so, yeah, Elizabeth, I also have another friend, Peter Torpy, who it lives nearby, who has a Braille display and has done some work with me on MuseScore accessibility. So I definitely want to get to the point of being able to work with a Braille display in person and really get a better sense of how that works. And that's something I'm, going to try to make happen this month. So let me take a step back, though. I just wanted to just open the thing up, open up the Braille display panel, and then got sidetracked by being surprised at how much information was in it. But let's take a step back here. Again, my goal here is to talk about ways of using Braille with MuseScore. That's kind of the main thing, but it encompasses a lot of aspects. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I feel like I want to talk about here. And then you all can tell me, well, what of this is most interesting to you, or what else along these lines is interesting. So certainly just being able to enable that Braille panel, that's obviously important. And once you've enabled it, by the way, if I then press Tab, after selecting a measure, say I select the alto sax part here, let's go to measure 2. In measure 2, there's less material there. If I then press Tab, it transfers keyboard focus to that Braille panel, and then I can use the cursor keys to move through it. And unfortunately, it does not seem like there is screen reader support with this. So it does not seem like even on Windows, the screen reader will read anything reasonable for these dots. But if we look down at the status bar, for sighted users here who are using this Braille panel, we can see that it says dynamic MF. So that is what my cursor is on right now. It is in the middle of the dynamic marking for the mezzo forte on beat 1, staff 4 guitar. So for sighted users using the Braille panel, the status bar is the thing. For a blind user using the Braille panel, it is not designed to work with a screen reader. It is designed to work with a Braille display, but unfortunately, so far not on Mac OS. As far as I know, it's either a limitation in the interface in the OS, or it's specific to particular devices. I really don't know the story, but as of right now, I don't know of any success stories of getting the Braille panel working with a Braille display on Mac OS, as far as I know. So so that's a known issue that is being investigated. So the Braille panel is a way of then displaying, if you do have a Windows system and the Braille panel, a Braille display attached, then once you're in that Braille panel, it will actually, raise the dots on your Braille display for each measure of music. And it does it one measure at a time. And so here's a question for those of you with Braille displays. How wide are your Braille displays? How many characters? I mean, I know they are more expensive the wider they get, but a full measure, like this line here, which is the piano staff here, the 5th line of MuseScore Café theme, it appears to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The cursor is smart enough to go multiple characters at a time, if multiple cells at a time if necessary. So I can't even easily count how many cells wide this is, but it's safe to say it's more than 20 cells. So a 40-cell display, I would assume, can capture most measures, right? I mean, if you've got a measure full of 16th notes, that's 16 16th notes, plus whatever other miscellaneous markings, you'll be somewhere in the 20s, right? So I would assume that a 40-cell display can handle most measures. Obviously, you got a measure full of 30-second notes plus accidentals and other things, then maybe not. But I would say most of the time you can fit a full measure into into those 40 cells. So I don't know what actually happens if the measure is too wide to fit on the Braille display. If cursor keys do things, or if the Braille display itself has a button to show the rest of it, I would be interested in knowing that. So if anyone has one connected and can tell me and then share it here in the chat, that would be most wonderful, because yeah, I'm curious what happens if a measure just has too many notes to fit on your Braille display. That would be interesting to find out. All right, so that's the Braille panel. I'm not going to exclusively talk about that. Let me give you, again, as I started to before, and James is saying that you can use buttons on the display to move forward, so that's great. Hopefully that works as expected. Again, I haven't had an opportunity to try it out. So, so some of the other things that I want to talk about, I'll talk about exporting Braille, which is very simple, from MuseScore, but then we'll take a look at the results and talk about, how we can work with that. But then I'm also going to talk about exporting to Music XML. And if you export a score to Music XML, then you can then use various converters that will convert that Music XML to Braille. And I'll show you two of those, and then we'll look at this Braille Music Notator app that I've talked about in the community. It is definitely my ace in the hole for being able to read Braille. I mean, it doesn't read the Braille for me, but it gives me some tools that are very useful for me in being able to read Braille as someone who doesn't really read it. So, so Elizabeth, I see that, yeah, you have buttons to move forward and backward, but I guess my question is, does that actually work with the MuseScore, which you won't have a way of knowing until you can get it working on your computer, which I'll let you know if we end up having any breakthroughs to get it working on Mac. But yeah, so I guess I was just curious if anything specific about how MuseScore is dumping the data out would cause any problems with narrower displays. So, all right, so let's talk next about exporting a score to Braille. So I've got my MuseScore Café theme here, but I feel like, this is way complicated, right? This is a complicated score. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's got 8 staves, got a lot of different stuff going on. Let's stick to simple for this. So I'm going to go ahead and use the example that we've been using, and apologize to the composers of this that we are kind of using this without having contacted them first, but I'm hoping that what we're doing here is not something that they would object to. But in any case, this is Firefly from Nancy and Randall Faber. Faber or Faber, not really sure how they would pronounce it, from their Piano Adventures series. So it's like a basic beginning here, beginner level piano book. So I've got this loaded up into MuseScore now, and let's go ahead and export this to Braille. So to do that, I will go to the File menu and then Export. And then there is a drop-down menu here, and you will select Braille here. Now, I'm describing what I'm doing in words and hoping that the way I'm describing it is sufficient to allow someone to get this from a screen reader. But I do know that operating this particular drop-down has been confusing to people. I think people are maybe thinking that it's going to operate with just cursor keys, and you actually need to press Enter to drop it down. Moving your cursor, moving the focus to the drop down doesn't automatically open it. You're going to have to explicitly press, space or whatever to open it up. So, all right, great, James. Thanks for the update on what happens if the measure's too wide. Glad to know it works. So once you open up the drop down menu for format, we're going to select Braille as our format, and with that selected. Now what? I accidentally unchecked the score when I was pressing space to see what would happen. I accidentally still had on the left. So I'm going to describe what's going on here in case this ever happens to you. After selecting Braille, I noticed my export button was grayed out. James, let me come back to you in a second and finish my thought, and then I'll come back here. So yeah, after I selected Braille as the format, I saw the export button was grayed out. And I'm like, well, why is that the case? And then I realized it's because there is a series of checkboxes to select what you want to export, whether you want to export the main score or individual parts. Now, this is a piano score, so there's only one individual part for piano. But in the MuseScore Café, of course, we would have had separate parts for the saxophone, trumpet, trombone, guitar, etc. And I had accidentally unchecked main score. Main score is normally checked by default. So I've rechecked main score and Braille is selected. And so now I can pick export. And when I do this, I can then give it a file name. And I've already done this before. I've selected it. I've exported it as Firefly MuseScore 4.brf. That's always how it's going to export. So that's it. You just do that. In the file dialog, you enter a file name or accept the default, pick a folder or accept the default, and it will export a BRF file for you. And I'm about to open that BRF file so we can see what it's in, and I'll try to talk through it, and then those of you who know Braille a little bit can help me out. But before I do that, let me address what James is asking, because I see your comment, so let me read it. It says, can we talk sometime off the cafe about accessibility? I sent a long document about gotchas and suggestions. So I guess what you're saying is just to talk about MuseScore accessibility in general. Yeah, and there's certainly lots of room for improvement in accessibility. Every release we make some improvements, and there's tons more that we would definitely like to make. I'm not sure where that long document you refer to is, but what I will say is the place to make requests for new features or new improvements in MuseScore is on the GitHub website. So rather than sending a document, opening GitHub issues and one per issue, as opposed to like a big long list in one issue, that's the way to do it, so that we can track them individually, address them individually, close them when they've been fixed, or close them if it turns out there's a misunderstanding and the feature is already there, etc. So yeah, there's tons of room for improvement in the accessibility MuseScore, and we definitely welcome those suggestions. But yeah, let's make sure that I know where this list is, because as of right now I don't, and then we can talk about the best way of proceeding from there. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open up that BRF file that I just saved, and I'm going to show you how I do it. So I'm going to go to a web browser. I'm just going to open up my favorite web browser, and I'm going to go to Braille Music Notator, and I just search for Braille Music Notator in the Google search box, and then the first thing that comes up after this AI generated stuff is the link to Braille Music Notator by Toby Rush, and that's what we want. And when we go there, you'll see a page that has information about the notator, but then the first real thing on the page is a button that says click here to open Braille Music Notator. That's what we want. So I've now done that, and we are seeing Firefly in all of its glory here, but this is something that I have been customizing. I'm going to close this. Let me actually get the screen a little less wide so that I can see the chat and the window at the same time. I'm going to open the BRF file that I just saved, and then we'll talk about what's going on in it, and see what is usable here. So I'm going to open the version that I just exported, or actually just exported yesterday. So I've opened that up here, and so for sighted people, you can see a little bit of what's going on. You see all these colored icons with notes and things in them, but let me walk through what's going on. What I see here are 4 lines of Braille cells, and then a blank line, and then 2 lines, and then a blank line, and then a bunch more lines. So what I'm perceiving here, and hopefully you all can help confirm this, what I'm perceiving is that those first 4 lines must be text. It must be like the title and composer and so forth. So Braille Music Notator is trying hard to interpret it as if it were music. And so it's showing me octave 7, E eighth note, A eighth note, G half note. It's showing me all this music, but I'm not buying that for a moment. I think that first line is the title. And I think Braille Music Notator is not recognizing it as the title because it's not centered. So there's my question for James and Elizabeth, or anyone else who would know. I think I know the answer. Titles are supposed to be centered, right? That's my impression. I think I can cut and paste this thing and move it to the center. If I cut it and then just paste it somewhere else, I don't know how necessary it is that it's exactly centered or just kind of more or less sort of centered. So I feel like that first chunk there is actually the word firefly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Ctrl+B. Ctrl+B is going to cycle through, and again, this is Braille Music Notator that I'm in right now, is going to cycle through all the different interpretations of these symbols. That symbol that is showing as an E eighth note, I think that's actually the letter F, but it could be a bunch of other things too. So as I press Ctrl+B, it's going to show me all the other things that Braille pattern could be. Oh, no. Ctrl+B just shows me the raw patterns. So the first cell is .6. The next one's dots 1, 2, and 4. And so I think that .6 is actually the capital letter, and I think dots 1, 2, and 4 is actually the letter F. So I think I pressed Ctrl+B to toggle between showing me raw dots and everything, but Ctrl+R is actually what cycles through the different interpretations. So if I press Ctrl+R now, it's going to show me, oh, I need to do that with all of them selected. So let me make sure I've got all of them selected and press Ctrl+R. It's going to cycle through, and it's showing me a lot of things. 6X. Oh, that E eighth note could also have been a whatever the heck that is, a 64th note or 128th note or something like that. But oh, look, the Y is looking the way I expect. Really, what I should just do, since I pretty well know it's the word firefly, I'm going to just go one letter at a time. There's capital letter. The next cell, I'll press Ctrl+R until it shows me a letter F. The next cell, keep pressing Ctrl+R till it shows me I. So the thing is, if I know what this indicates, Ctrl+R will let me see that. And so now I can see it says capital letter firefly. That's what those cells actually meant. Similar, the next line is probably the composer. The next line is probably some other, maybe it's a copyright information. Next line is probably something about tempo and so forth. So I'm not going to worry about those first several lines because I'm assuming they're all text. Then there's a blank line. And then after the blank line, we have something, and let me just go to Ctrl+B and look at the raw cells so that I can ask and you all can tell me. The next line after the title and all that, and then after a blank line, starts off in column 1. And before I go further, I'll just point out that that's one thing about MuseScore's Braille output is it's putting a lot of stuff starting in column 1 that I don't expect, right? I kind of expect Music Braille to maybe have a measure number somewhere in those first 2 or 3 columns, but not right in column 1. So I'm always a little confused about that. Oh, Elizabeth, you mentioned built-in screen reader on the site. You're talking about the Braille Music Notator. Yes, Control+1. I totally discovered by accident enables 1. Let me do this.
Screen reader on.
Here we go. Let me turn the volume back up.
Line 5, character 1, dots 1. Line 5, character 0, time signature prefix.
Right? So this is not my screen reader. This is like one built into the site. I don't even see it documented, but I accidentally pressed Control+1 and heard it come on. So did you read about that and find it somewhere? Or maybe you're accessing it some other way. But supposedly it supports other screen readers, but it doesn't seem to work with ChromeVox, because when I'm trying to use ChromeVox with it, it's not working. But presumably it works okay with NVDA and JAWS and so forth and VoiceOver. But supposedly it does. But anyhow, Control+1 seems to enable a built-in screen reader, but it also seems like it stops reading at some point. Yeah, so you just happen to press it. So But that voice isn't familiar to me. The speed is nothing I set before, so I'm really not sure what it's coming from. But all right, let me turn that off again.
Screen reader off.
And let me ask you about these first two symbols that I see. It's dots 3, 4, 5, 6 in the first cell, and then dot 1 in the next cell. This is the first line of music. Oh, so James is saying 1 piano, 2 piano, non-standard. So yeah, so is this trying to tell me, is that that combination dots 3, 4, 5, 6, and then dot 1? Is that meant to be telling me something about this being a piano right hand? And then the next one is the next line starts off. It's a part list. Part list. So if that's the case, are the next symbol? So it starts off with those first two cells. The first cell is again 3, 4, 5, 6. The next cell is 1, and then the next few cells after that, then there's a blank space for column 3, and then columns 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 all have characters in them that are basically the same between the two parts. So maybe that's the word piano. Is it? Is that possibly the word piano? I don't know. See, that's where knowing what the heck I'm supposed to be looking at here really makes a big difference for me, knowing it is the word piano. It's the word piano. Look at that. I just pressed Ctrl+R a bunch of times, and the thing sorted it out for me. So do that again here. Word, capital letter, piano. Brilliant. All right, so that meter, that first thing where it was dots 3, 4, 5, 6, and then just dot 1 and 3, 4, 5, 6, and 2. So this is a part list, you're saying. So this is just saying that there's two parts, and that numbering scheme of dot 1 for the first part and dots 1 and 2 for the second part is, you said non-standard. So, but you were able to recognize what it was. So these are questions for me to understand how I'm supposed to know these things as I look at this, if you don't already know what to expect. So I want to learn what to expect. So like I knew to expect those first 4 lines to just be text, and so I just skipped them, knowing that I can eventually sort that out. But before I get non-standard to show a part list for just a piano. But if it was multiple parts, and that makes sense, because anytime it's automatically generated, yeah, you sort of expect it might do the same thing for one part as it would for multiple parts. That doesn't surprise me, I guess. So so there you go. So that's one thing to know about MuseScore's automatic output, is it's going to put in a part list no matter what. But then after that, all these other things also have, nothing is music starting in column 4, like I expect. So that's my next question for the people who know Braille. I do see, looks like column 3 is being used to start the music fairly regularly, because there's often a blank space in often a blank space in columns 1 and 2, and then the first cell of a line is often in column 3. Is that something where you just sort of do that if you know you don't need 4 columns, you don't need 3 introductory columns? That's another one of those questions that I just don't know the answer to. So anyhow, this process, exporting from MuseScore directly to a BRF file and reading it in, you're going to get something. I want to show you the other methods of getting Braille in here and see if they look any little better. Start as column 3 when you have a single digit bar number. So, okay, so that's good to know. That is good to know that that's a thing. So, because yeah, I sort of see variations in that. So I'm going to return to MuseScore now. And when I return to MuseScore, now instead of exporting this as Braille, I want to export to Music XML. So I'm going to go to the File menu and export again. And this time, instead of selecting Braille as my format, I'm going to select Music XML as my format. And this came up, I think, in last week's cafe. Once you do that, you'll see that there's actually a choice of 3 different file types here. There's compressed, uncompressed music XML, and uncompressed outdated XML. So I'm going to recommend that you use the second one there, uncompressed.musicxml. The compressed one, .mxl, is basically just that zipped. And that's fine if you know the program you're sending that music XML file is okay with compressed music XML files. Not all are. So if you export to compressed MXL, you might find that some programs can't open it, and then you'll have to unzip it yourself. So I usually pick the uncompressed format. And there's 2 different versions of this. It either says uncompressed.musicxml or uncompressed outdated.xml. These 2 are identical. There is no difference whatsoever in the file that gets exported. It is just about whether the file name that it defaults to will say .musicxml or .xml. .xml was the old standard. You know, back in the 80s when you could only have 3-letter extensions, that was what was used for everything. But then you have the problem of you can't tell the difference between music XML files and other XML files. So it's not recommended, but programs designed in the 80s might only support .xml, or just programs designed by people who learned about music XML back in the 80s might only know about that 3-letter extension. So for the last, I don't know how many years, but actually not that many, .musicxml has been the preferred file extension, but not all programs will know it. So I will pick .musicxml, but if any given program doesn't support it, all I got to do is rename it to .xml and it will be fine. So I've picked the .musicxml, and now when I save it, I see firefly.musicxml is a file name that I can give it, and I'm just going to give it that and save it. It tells me it already exists because I already did this before. But now that I have that music XML file, I'm going to try 2 different ways of getting that into Braille Music Notator. One of them is going to be to import it via Braille Muse. Braille Muse is a third-party website that can convert music XML to Braille. So if I hit the open file and it tells me all changes will be lost, I'm actually going to keep this. I'm going to stop here with that and actually just open this in another window, another tab, because I don't want to lose what I just did. So let me reopen Braille Music Notator in another tab. And in this tab, I will say File, Open, and I'm going to tell it to open that music XML file, firefly.musicxml. Wow, that was fast. Oh, okay. So it says it's opening a Braille Music XML file, but what it's actually doing is it's just raw displaying the music XML. I'm seeing the actual music XML words here: duration, voice, type half, stem up. This is all just taking that music XML file and displaying it as text. It's supposed to be using Braille Muse to convert that music XML to Braille, but it didn't work, perhaps because this program doesn't know about .musicxml. So I'm going to go ahead and change the name of that file to .xml so that Braille Music Notator might be happier with it. So let me go to that folder and take that file. I'll also just make a copy of it. So I'm making a copy of this, calling it .xml, and now I'm going to try to open that from Braille Music Notator, see if that causes it to hop over to Braille Muse for me. Screen froze? Is everyone else seeing a screen? Well, I see your text, Allison, saying screen froze. So I have a feeling, and I see myself. I think it must be working for others. Could someone type into the chat to suggest that Allison refresh her screen? Okay, so it blinked and came back. So yeah, maybe please suggest to her to try refreshing the screen, and if that doesn't work, leave and come back. Those are, always my ace in the holes. So now I'm loading .xml, but I get the exact same thing. It's still showing me kind of the raw stuff. So I think what happened is, could someone please tell, yeah, and reassure her that everything is still okay for, well, hopefully, yeah, you can see Elizabeth say, I can hear you. So hopefully things are okay. So it used to be that if you tried to open a music XML file from within Braille Music Notator, it would go to Braille Muse to do the conversion. But what Toby told me recently is that stopped working, and he was trying to get it working again, and apparently it's not. So I'm going to go to Braille Muse. It's braillemuse.net. So braillemuse.net. If you go to braillemuse.net, this is a website run out of Japan that is able to do a conversion for you. So I'm going to go to the English version of the site, and yes, enter Braille Muse for Braille Music translation. That's what I want. And then it's got a whole bunch of options here where I can select whether I want slur marks removed or not, whether I want pedals removed or not, whether I want rhythmic groups, stem signs, all these details, how many measures per line, all this detail that I can select here. I'm just going to go with the defaults. And when I'm done, I'm going to say choose file and pick that music XML file, and then say run. And when I do this, I now have this file displaying on my screen the way Braille often displays. It's not using actual Braille cells. It's using all the funny, punctuation characters and everything that happen if you try to take Braille and display it with a font that doesn't understand it. So, but that's fine. I don't need it to. What I need is to then say that I want to download this file. Enter the output file name if I need to change it. I don't necessarily need to change it, so let me just pick download. And so it is going to save it as .brl. So hopefully that's okay. I'm going to pick that. BRL versus BRF, someone can refresh my memory about the difference. It might have to do with that encoding, but hopefully Braille Music Notator will be okay with it, and we're about to find out. So I'm going to open that BRL file that I just saved and see what I get. Ah, this looks like music. Okay, I see Firefly apostrophe XML. I see a meter of 4/4, and then I see right hand and left hand. I see all these notifications. In fact, this looks like practically perfect to me. So I can read this thing. I see meter 4/4. I see measure 1, right hand. Okay, there's something funny at the beginning here, very funny actually. So I thought I could read it, but now I'm looking at notes here, and I'm seeing stuff I don't understand. I see a repeat measure sign, and then a 16th rest sign, and then a D half note. None of those things are in the first measure of the piece. So that stuff is clearly being misinterpreted, right? So in measure 1, let me Control B. The first thing I see is dots, is a cell of dots 4 and 6, and then 3, 4, 5, and then 3. So that is the right hand mark. I believe that. But then there's this thing that is being interpreted as a repeat sign. It's the word moderately. Oh my gosh. So the word moderately. That's brilliant, James. So I totally believe you that is the word moderately. So here's an interesting thing that shows up within measure 1, not as a separate line. And that's another one of those things that, it's useful for people like me to understand that. Should I always expect the tempo marking to be kind of along with the title, or is it sometimes in the first measure, or is it normally always within the first measure? But let me go ahead and select those characters that are spelling out the word moderately and press Ctrl+R a few times and see if I can get it to There's most of the word moderately. So I will eventually get, is that a capital letter, I wonder, or is that just, what are the dot pattern for capital letter? Is it 2, 3, 5, 6? Yeah, that's what I've got first, and then I've got the word moderately. Eventually this will be a letter M, right? All right. Anyhow, that's the word moderately. And then I have mezzo piano. So dot 6 is just the capital letter. So this one here that's 2, 3, and then 5, 6 that shows up before the word. Oh yeah, old style bracket. It's the exact same symbol that we saw in Jeannie's version of Firefly, where there was that pattern outside around the composer name. So yeah, that's a similar thing. And so I guess Braille Muse uses that. But beyond that, once I get past the word moderately, I see mezzo piano dynamic. I see octave 4. I see G, and then a 2-dot pattern here that is not being interpreted. It's dots 1 and 3, and I already know what that is. That's a fingering marking, right? So if I press Ctrl+R a few times on that, it eventually shows me it's fingering number 5. So I have G quarter note, fingering 5, G quarter note, E half note, and then a space for a bar line. And then I got some nonsense that I am not understanding here. I mean, that Braille Music Notator isn't understanding, but I'm assuming it is the second measure. So I expect that second measure to then be either this is another octave marking. No, it doesn't look like one. It must just be the notes. It must not be repeating the octave marking. So this is probably just another note. And if I press Ctrl+R, it's dots 1, 2, and then 4, 5, 6. So it's, yeah, I can never remember. It's an F quarter note. And then this next cell is just dot 2, and that's another fingering marking, I believe. Yeah, fingering number 4, and then we have another F quarter note. And again, since I know kind of what it is, I'm just hitting Ctrl+R until I see the thing that that I know it is already. But it's useful to me now because now that I've made that change, now I can read this really easily. I don't have to keep remembering what these dot patterns mean. So that's why I do take the time to go through this Ctrl+R business. Obviously, if you know Braille, you don't need it. And that last symbol was the D half note. All right, so here's my next question then for people who do read Braille. That was the right hand. The next line is left hand, and it's showing 16th rest, and even I know that that's not really a 16th rest, it's a whole rest. So let me just change that with Ctrl+R because they have the same Braille sign. So it's showing me this is doing 2 measures per line. So this is showing me in the left hand 2 measures per line. However, they are not aligned underneath the first line at all. In other words, that first measure whole note is directly underneath the word moderately. And so is the second measure whole note. We're still under the word moderately. So they're not lining up measure to measure here. So that's something that should be the case, right? The measures should line up, even if the notes don't necessarily line up rhythmically. We expect the measures to line up. That's my understanding. I would love to be, informed more if that's not true. But in any case, that seems to be something that Braille Muse does, right? So we can see that the information is there. The measures should line up, and they're not. It's a limitation of Braille Muse. So the next thing I want to do is I want to use the Salmi Braille converter. So the Salmi, and I have all these links. Actually, I didn't put the Braille Muse link in the post that I made in the accessibility space, only because my impression is the Braille Muse one is not really being updated very often. The Salmi one is, and I think it's perceived to be better overall, but let's find out. So here's the, I'm about to use the Salmi converter, which works essentially the same way. It's got all these settings that I can control how many characters wide it is. I can control whether octave signs are placed before each measure. Hey, there's an option for that. That's cool to know. I can control whether tie sign is used for slur and tie, whether grace slur is with dots 5, 6, and 1, 4. There's all these different options you can set, and I'm going to assume that they chose better defaults than I'm going to. So I just want to choose my file, and I will again choose that music XML file, and then just say I want to translate. When it translates, it has its own little window that is displaying these dots correctly. In other words, using the right fonts so that I see dots. I don't see those sort of weird punctuation characters that Braille Muse showed me. So it's actually showing me the right dots for the thing. And just looking at the dots within the Salmi website here, I see stuff that makes me happy. I see 3 lines that look centered, and I know that must be the title and the composer and either the tempo or something else. And then I see a blank line, and then I see something that is probably the meter, and I'll find out later. And then I see a bunch of lines that are very clearly music. I see what look like measure numbers at the beginning, and then stuff starting in like column 3 or 4. So it basically looks good to me. And so I'm going to download the thing. And so this is the version that came from Salmi. So let me, didn't I already save one from Salmi? I did. So I'm just going to resave this thing again and rename it. This is the Salmi version. So now I'm going to take Braille Music Notator, and I am going to load that Salmi version. So we're kind of comparing and contrasting the quality of the automatic translations here. That's what we're doing here. So I'm saying I want to open, and I want to open that Salmi version. So when I open the Salmi version, the first thing I see is nothing has been translated for me. Do I need to press Ctrl B? No. When I press Ctrl B, nothing's happening. So somehow, something about how this is encoded is causing Braille Music Notator to not understand a thing, which is a little distressing to me. But I will still assume that if I select stuff and press Ctrl+R, it will show me lots of other stuff, and I can figure out what is going on with this first line after the blank line. Because again, the first 3 lines I'm assuming is title and stuff like that. Change my SMB from Unicode to ASCII in the options. Oh, is that what I need to do? All right, well, let me, because I thought I had done this and gotten it working before, but let's see. Yeah, let's just go ahead and do that. I will save a separate version of this now where I want to choose ASCII instead of Unicode. So I've selected my file, settings, format, bar over bar, yes. A line from start or a line from note. I don't know what that is. Okay, here's the output encoding. I will pick ASCII and then again say translate. And it says done, and it still looks good, but let me hit it again just to make sure it really did it. And download, and this is the ASCII version. So this is Firefly Salmi ASCII. And now I will try loading that into Braille Music Notator to see if it makes any difference. Open. Yeah, I think either it didn't update anything or I'm still misunderstanding something pretty fundamental here. So I'm not sure what's actually going on. But it still does work for me to select these cells individually and start pressing Ctrl+R to cycle through different things. So it is showing me reasonable cells. But I guess I'm mistaken about... Yeah, so I'm not sure what happened here because when I did the Salmi one version before, it was able to display better in Braille Music Notator. But in any case, I can tell just by looking at it that it looks pretty decent here in principle. I see what appear to be measure numbers in column 2. I see column 4 starting what appears to be music. But yeah, the whole ASCII thing, I guess, is maybe why I see cells that appear to have no dots that are different from empty cells. Like that's a thing in ASCII, I guess. I see a whole lot of spacer cells that are just nothing but .6. And I think I've heard of those before, and that's to let you know that is used when aligning measures, correct? If you've got a left-hand measure that starts midway through the page because there's nothing there's nothing much, measure 1 has basically nothing in it. Measure 2 is way off to the right. They use these spacers with just .6 so that you're aware, hey, keep scanning, you'll eventually find more information. I think that's what those dots are about. So yeah, somehow I've gotten something a little crossed there, but I'm not going to obsess about that. But anyhow, those are the three different ways of getting Braille music out of MuseScore: exporting it directly, or exporting it to Music XML and then converting with Braille Muse, or exporting to Music XML and then converting with Salmi. And any of those can then be loaded into this Braille Music Notator for the aid of people like me who need those sorts of aids to read this thing. But presumably that they all could be read equally well directly with a Braille display. So that's different ways of doing this. And yeah, James, these are actually .6, unless that's because of this whole ASCII Unicode thing messing it up. But I've got all these cells that appear to be the left hand of the music, I guess, because I see it's the second line of the start of the music. And all these cells that are just nothing but .6. And I see the same thing in a bunch of other lines also. So yeah, it looks like anytime there's more than 5 spaces, it turns them into .6s. That seems to be the rule being followed here, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I do wish I understood more about why. Maybe I just need to reload the page for Salmi and change to ASCII. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to reload the page for Salmi because I am a little curious what's going on. More than a little curious, actually. So I've reloaded the page. I will re-choose the file of Firefly, and I will re-choose under Format ASCII, and then I will redo Translate into Braille. It says done. Yeah, so I think what happened is it just didn't even do it again. I think because I didn't reload the page, it just said, hey, I've already translated that file, and it didn't do anything else. So yeah, I think what happened is I was still looking at the Unicode version, and that was just messed up. So now I'm seeing in their little display all the ASCII stuff. So there we go. So that's apparently what I needed to do, is refresh the page to force it to regenerate. So now this is the Salmi ASCII version, and now I can load this guy into Braille Music Notator and have a better idea of what's going on. So let me load that now. Much better. Yeah, this looks better. Almost like a dream. What the heck? How did it get the wrong title? Wait a minute. Is that? What the heck? Almost like a dream. Nancy and Randall Faber, Piano Adventures, Piano. That information isn't in the score. Oh, is it taking it from the properties? If I go to File, Properties, almost like a... Wow. Okay, so this is great information that I just learned here. The Salmi converter is generating information not just based on what's actually visible in the score. It's generating information based on what's in the properties. So within MuseScore, if you go to File, Project Properties, then you have this dialog that has all this information. And frankly, I think this dialog might not be fully accessible, not positive, but this is where the metadata for that file is. This is where you would put, where it stores information like the date created, what operating system you were used, what the URL is for this score, if you've saved it on MuseScore.com, what version of MuseScore you used, all this sort of stuff. So in any case, that information for this score is wrong, which is very typical, because often what happens is you create one score, you set it up the way you want, and then you just make a copy of it and edit it, and then it still has the old metadata. So that's one reason to use templates instead. Templates will always reset that metadata. But in any case, what has happened is the SAL-MY converter is using the information from the metadata, not the information visible in the score. And that's why the SAL-MY version of this says the title is Almost Like a Dream and not, in fact, Firefly. But other than that, it all looks like it makes sense and looks very similar to what I expect above and beyond that. So good. Some mysteries solved. So Marla's question about the performer reading with their fingers and playing. So you've asked the $1 million question, and James and Elizabeth, if you're still around, you feel free to weigh in on this. But if you're singing, that's doable. If you're playing, it's obviously not on an instrument. It's a memorization process. Read a little, memorize, play. Right. So it's exactly as inconvenient as you might imagine, but it's like the best that we know of, right? I mean, you could have a screen reader try to read into your ear while you're playing. That's not very practical either. Yeah, there's a lot of memorization involved in actually playing from Braille because you need a hand for it. So there you go. So let me just come back to MuseScore for a moment here. And before I wrap up, talk about a few other things. So I had mentioned that there was some general accessibility things to talk about, and I've just posted in the community in the accessibility space all my the playlist with my tutorial videos. I got a series of 5 tutorial videos on installing MuseScore with a screen, everything meaning like with a screen reader. So how to install, how to set up a score as far as choosing instruments and so forth, how to enter notes, how to enter symbols from the palette, and another one for something else that I don't even remember. but there's 5 of them. And then also, another general tutorial on using MuseScore. What I'm going to say here is a general thing is that almost everything in MuseScore can be done with keyboard. There's only a few things that can't be. Some are more convenient than others. And so over time, I've tended to always prefer keyboard shortcuts for things simply for efficiency's sake, but also then for accessibility, you want there to be shortcuts. Shortcuts are different than navigation, right? Because shortcut means one P to press. You memorize when I press N, it puts me in note input mode, and N again takes me out. But so you can't have a shortcut for every single button on the entire user interface. There's more shortcuts. There's more things than would be possible. And you would never be able to memorize them all. But in addition, there's navigation. So I just want to briefly talk about the navigation in MuseScore, because this is a new thing in MuseScore 4, well, newish, that I want to make sure people understand. And I cover it in the tutorial, but it's worth talking about here also, because again, useful for anyone, not just blind users. In old school user interfaces, Tab was the key to press to move from one button to the next. And if you press Tab, after selecting something in the score, you press Tab once, it takes me to the Braille panel. Press it again, looks like it takes me to the Properties panel. Press it again, takes me within the Properties panel. Press it again, it looks like it's taken me to the Workspace control, etc. Tab moves you through all these different controls. And in old school interfaces, Tab, the interface here has, I don't know how many controls, like 30 or 40 controls visible: home, score, publish, parts, mixer, rewind, play, note input, 64th note, 32nd. It's got a zillion things, and Tab would have to take you through each of them individually. So that works, but Unfortunately, well, not necessarily unfortunately, it was decided that we're going to try to simplify this by adopting a relatively new scheme in which tab doesn't take you through every single button anymore, but instead there's a hierarchy. So the thing to know is F6 now moves you through major areas. So with the score selected, F6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got to find F6 on my keyboard. F6 takes me directly to properties. F6 again takes me to workspace. F6 again takes me to home. F6 again takes me to node input. F6 again takes me to the score. So it was a very short tour of the user interface just by pressing F6. But once you get to the right area of the interface, like once I'm on that score there, now I can use the cursor keys to move within that group. Or I can press tab to move to the next group within that toolbar. So F6 takes you through like the highest level of the hierarchy. Tab takes you through the next level of the hierarchy. And then cursors take you through the next level of the hierarchy. So no button is usually more than like 4 or 5 key presses away, but you have to think a little bit more. So this is something we can all take advantage of. In, when I say we all, I mean blind users who need the keyboard to navigate, but also people who just want to not use the mouse so much for whatever other reason. It is a convenient thing to know about this whole hierarchy of F6, tab, and cursor keys. So now, Elizabeth, here's why I said unfortunately before. I saw your question, and then I said unfortunately. Unfortunately, the custom shortcut dialog is annoyingly not accessible. It's like the one dialog you'd most want to be accessible. It's once you're in the box that lets you type keys, there's no key that'll get you out of that box because it keeps trying to interpret it as a shortcut. So unfortunately, the only way to create custom shortcuts is going to be to either, well, 2 ways. I will tell you the 2 ways, and then we'll wrap up. Way number 1, get a sighted person to help you navigate that dialog because that's just the way it is for now. It's a known issue. Hopefully will be addressed. But here's the other way. In that dialog, you can export your shortcut definition. There's a thing that says save shortcuts or export shortcuts or whatever it says. Edit, preferences, shortcuts. It says export. If you export your shortcut definitions, it creates an XML file, not a music XML file, a plain ordinary XML file that you can then load into a text editor. And, it's not like we document the format of the thing, but I think if you load that thing into a text editor, you'll be able to sort out what's actually happening. And you will then be able to figure out how to create custom shortcuts. So I'm going to create and if we need help, I'll try to do a little tutorial on that or something, because it is a useful thing and it feels like would be a useful thing to add to my tutorial playlist there. So in any case, that is possible. It is possible to export that to an XML file, edit the XML file, and then import it again. And that way you can create some custom shortcuts. So Marla, formatting for harp where octaves are marked in reverse. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but it also sounds like you're probably, I'm not sure what you're talking about here. If you're talking about Braille octave markings, I don't think they're instrument specific. So yeah, in any case, ask about that in the community, and then we can follow up with that. But I think we need to wrap up here because, been chatting quite a while about Braille and all these issues here. So let's get back to... Ooh, I accidentally soloed the trumpet part because I do that sometimes. Press escape and here we go. So thanks everyone here. And so, this topic was specifically about Braille and related issues. And, every week we have a different topic. Next week is the score of the month, where I enter one piece of music directly into MuseScore. And I'm going to do that with an eye towards doing everything by keyboard. I probably won't actually enable my screen reader for it because that's, I know, very distracting to a lot of people, and I would need it to be super slow to be understandable to me. But I will talk through everything that I do so that screen reader users who are using keyboard can follow along with what I'm doing as we enter a simple piece of music into MuseScore. That's what we'll be doing next week. So hopefully people found this useful, and I know I did. I learned some things, and thanks Elizabeth, thanks James, especially the two of you for the insights into Braille music and how these tools work. The session is recorded, so of course people can access it later, and I think people will find it useful going forward as well. So tomorrow will be Music Masterclass, and we're just going to talk about music, and we'll talk about it by listening. We'll listen to some music and see how much we can hear about it, what's going on by ear. And that's kind of my plan for tomorrow. So hope to see you then, and have a great day. Have a great week. Talk to you later.